Harold Carter leaned back in his chair and smiled as though the courtroom already belonged to him. "I told you she'd fold eventually," he said loudly enough for the first 2 rows of relatives to hear. A few of them chuckled. Across the room, Lisa Carter stood beside her attorney without responding. She didn't glare at Harold. She didn't defend herself. She simply accepted the stack of papers the opposing attorney slid across the table. Her own lawyer lowered his voice. "Lisa, if you sign this, you'll be giving up the house, the company, everything we've been fighting over." "I know. You still have time to change your mind." She looked at the final page, only long enough to find the signature line. Then she signed. 1 page. Then another. And another. Harold crossed his arms, satisfaction spreading across his face. I knew grief wouldn't make her smarter. Several members of the Carter family exchanged relieved smiles. Someone whispered, "It's finally over." The judge reached for the settlement, preparing to make it official. Lisa quietly placed the pen back on the table. She looked almost peaceful. That was the part no one understood. Because everyone in that courtroom believed they were watching a broken widow surrender everything she had left. No one noticed the brief glance Lisa exchanged with her attorney. No one except him understood it wasn't fear. It was timing. And just as Harold's attorney began reading the final paperwork aloud, his voice stopped. Only 3 weeks earlier, Lisa had buried her husband, Daniel. The funeral flowers were still fresh when Harold arrived at her front door, not alone, but with 2 attorneys carrying leather briefcases instead of condolences. Lisa opened the door expecting family. Instead, Harold stepped inside without asking. "We need to discuss the estate." She looked toward the living room, where her 7-year-old daughter was quietly coloring beside the fireplace. "This isn't the day for this." "It is exactly the day." He placed a folder on the dining table. "I'm taking the house." Lisa stared at him. "I'm taking the business." He continued, as though reading a grocery list. "I'm taking every major asset Daniel ever touched." His expression never changed. "You can keep the child." The silence that followed hurt more than the words. Lisa searched his face, hoping to find even a trace of grief for the son they had both lost. There was none. Only calculation. Within days, lawsuits arrived. Harold claimed Lisa had contributed little to the company despite spending 12 years helping Daniel build Carter custom furniture from a small workshop into one of the region's most respected handcrafted furniture manufacturers. She had handled payroll when cash was tight, negotiated supplier contracts, managed employees during Daniel's treatments, kept production running while spending nights beside his hospital bed. None of that appeared anywhere in Harold's filings. According to the documents, she was little more than a spouse who happened to be present. The accusations spread quickly. Extended family repeated Harold's version without question. "She's trying to take what belongs to the Carter bloodline. She should be grateful for whatever Harold offers." It's time she moved on. Every conversation seemed to end with the same advice. Just walk away peacefully. Even Lisa's attorney struggled to understand her decisions. "They're asking for preliminary control of company operations," he told her during one meeting. "We can challenge this immediately." "No. They're requesting temporary possession of the house until ownership is decided." "Let them." He removed his glasses. "Lisa, why are we giving away ground?" She didn't answer. Motion after motion went uncontested. Harold interpreted every concession as proof she had accepted defeat. By the time the final hearing arrived, even seasoned courthouse reporters expected a quick victory for Harold Carter. Now, back inside the courtroom, the judge extended his hand toward the completed settlement. Harold leaned forward confidently. His attorney unfolded one final attachment and suddenly stopped reading. His eyes remained fixed on a single paragraph. The The color drained from his face. Harold's attorney had gone pale in the courtroom. Weeks earlier, Lisa had seen that exact expression only once before, on Daniel's face. It happened 3 months before he died. At the time, she hadn't understood why. The memory returned as Lisa sat alone in the master bedroom after another exhausting meeting with her lawyer. The house felt unnaturally quiet. Daniel's watch still rested on the nightstand. His reading glasses remained beside the unfinished novel he never got to finish. Their daughter, Emily, had finally fallen asleep after asking the same heartbreaking question she asked every night. "Mom, when Dad gets better, can we all go to the lake again?" Lisa had kissed her forehead. "We'll always go to the lake." It wasn't the answer Emily wanted, but it was all Lisa could give. When the bedroom door closed behind her, the silence finally caught up with her. She reached into Daniel's closet, intending to pack away a few jackets. Instead, she stopped. His scent still lingered in the fabric. She closed her eyes. "You always knew how to fix everything," she whispered. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Her attorney, Michael Reeves, stood outside carrying another folder. "I'm sorry to come this late." Lisa stepped aside. "I figured it wasn't good news." "It isn't." They sat across from each other at the dining table Daniel had built by hand years earlier. Michael opened the folder. Harold's amended complaint just came in. Lisa read the first page silently. "He says I never helped run the company." Michael nodded. "He claims Daniel handled every important decision himself." Lisa almost smiled. "That's convenient. He also says your salary was symbolic, that you weren't actually part of management." Lisa folded the papers carefully instead of reacting. Michael watched her. "I expected you'd be angry. I've known Harold long enough." "You expected this." She leaned back in her chair. "Daniel once told me something." Michael waited. "He said that if anything ever happened to him, Harold wouldn't mourn him for very long." "What did he mean?" "He never explained." She stared toward the hallway, where Emily's bedroom door remained slightly open. "He only told me not to panic if his father ever came after us." Michael frowned. "And you never asked why?" "I thought he was talking about grief." She looked down at her wedding ring. "Now I think he meant something else." The next morning, Lisa began sorting through Daniel's office. Not searching for sentimental keepsakes. Searching for answers. She opened file cabinets filled with supplier contracts, employee records, and design sketches. Everything looked ordinary. Until she noticed something unusual. Several folders had been reorganized only weeks before Daniel entered hospice care. Daniel had always been meticulous. He never rearranged records without a reason. She continued looking. A legal correspondence folder caught her attention. The law firm's name wasn't the one that had handled the family's business for decades. It belonged to an entirely different firm. Lisa frowned. "Why would you change attorneys?" She carefully set the documents aside. Another memory surfaced. One evening during Daniel's treatment, he had walked into the kitchen carrying a small fireproof document case. "I want you to know where this stays." Lisa laughed softly. "Planning another surprise anniversary trip?" "No." His expression had been unusually serious. "If anyone ever asks about company ownership, don't guess." She remembered teasing him. "You sound mysterious." "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If something happens to me." She immediately interrupted him. "Nothing's happening to you." Daniel had forced a smile. "Promise anyway." "I promise." She had forgotten that conversation. Until now. Later that afternoon, Michael returned. Lisa placed several certified corporate filings on the table. "I need copies of these." Michael looked confused. These aren't part of Harold's complaint. I know. They're old ownership records. I know. He looked at her carefully. Lisa, what exactly are you looking for? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the final page. A filing date. A signature. A registration stamp. Something clicked. She read the document one more time. Then, for the first time since Daniel's funeral, she smiled. Michael blinked. What is it? Lisa carefully closed the folder. Then this case is already over. She looked directly at him. They just don't know it yet. The first major court hearing drew far more attention than anyone expected. By the time Lisa arrived, every seat in the gallery was occupied. Employees from Carter Custom Furniture filled one side of the courtroom. Some had worked with Daniel for decades. Others had only known the version of the company Harold had built before Daniel modernized it. Several investors sat quietly in the back row. Local business reporters lined the walls with notepads ready. And nearly every member of the Carter family had come to watch what they assumed would be Harold reclaiming his company. As Lisa walked to her table, conversation stopped. She could feel dozens of eyes following her. Harold didn't even acknowledge her. Instead, he greeted shareholders and relatives as though he were already celebrating. One cousin leaned over and whispered loudly enough for Lisa to hear. She should have settled before embarrassing herself. Another replied with a shrug. Greed makes people irrational. Lisa kept walking. She never looked their way. When proceedings began, Harold's attorney stood confidently. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. He paced slowly before the judge. My client founded Carter Custom Furniture with his own hands. He devoted his life to building a respected business. He turned toward Lisa. Mrs. Carter married into that success. His voice grew firmer. Now, after the tragic passing of Daniel Carter, she seeks to retain assets that rightfully belong to the Carter family. Harold nodded solemnly, carefully playing the role of a grieving father. The performance was convincing. Several people in the gallery quietly agreed with each point. Then came the hardest accusation. The attorney projected financial reports onto a courtroom screen. During Daniel Carter's illness, company profits declined. Charts appeared one after another. Operational delays increased. Another graph. Supplier disputes multiplied. He looked directly at the judge. Mrs. Carter was responsible for day-to-day management during this period. He paused. The numbers speak for themselves. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Employees exchanged uneasy glances. An investor slowly crossed his arms. One reporter began typing faster. Lisa remained completely still. Her attorney rose. The gallery expected an immediate attack on Harold's claims. Instead, Michael calmly said, We have no objection to admitting these summary reports. Harold's attorney smiled. So we're in agreement. Not entirely. Michael stepped toward the bench. We simply request that the court order production of the complete accounting records for the same period. Harold's attorney frowned slightly. The summaries already reflect the relevant information. Then producing the original records shouldn't present any difficulty. The judge looked toward Harold's legal team. Can your client comply? Harold answered before his attorney could. Of course. His confidence returned instantly. We have nothing to hide. The judge nodded. The request is reasonable. Full accounting records will be produced. Lisa lowered her eyes to hide the smallest hint of satisfaction. Michael noticed, but he said nothing. Outside the courthouse, cameras surrounded Harold. This lawsuit should be over soon, he declared confidently. The Carter legacy deserves to remain with the Carter family. Several relatives applauded his statement. Across the sidewalk, reporters approached Lisa. "Mrs. Carter, do you have any response?" She simply answered, "I believe complete records tell complete stories." Nothing more. She walked away holding Emily's hand. The reporters looked disappointed. Harold laughed quietly. "She's run out of arguments." That evening, Harold was relaxing in his study when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. It was the company's accounting manager. He answered casually. "What is it?" The nervous voice on the other end barely slowed down. "Mr. Carter, we've searched the archives twice. And we can't locate several years of the original accounting files." Harold sat upright. "What do you mean you can't locate them?" "The summary reports are here." A long pause followed. "But the original financial records are gone." Harold's smile disappeared. Harold didn't sleep that night. Before sunrise, he was already inside the company's headquarters, standing in the accounting department with a stack of storage inventories spread across a conference table. "Search again," he ordered. "We already have, sir," the accounting manager replied cautiously. "Then search better." Another employee stepped forward with a nervous expression. "We checked the archive room, the off-site storage, even the digital backups. And they're incomplete." Harold slammed his palm against the table. Incomplete isn't an answer. No one spoke. For the first time since filing the lawsuit, Harold looked less like the man in control and more like someone trying to outrun a problem he couldn't yet define. The following week, the court's discovery order took effect. Every financial record connected to Carter Custom Furniture had to be produced. Not summaries. Not selected reports. Everything. Independent forensic accountants entered the company's offices carrying sealed evidence boxes and laptop cases. Employees watched silently as years of corporate records were cataloged. Harold tried to maintain his confidence. "This is routine," he assured several department managers. "It'll be over in a few days." But the lead forensic accountant wasn't interested in reassurances. He requested bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, board meeting minutes, ownership records, executive compensation files. Every missing document created another question. 3 days into the review, the first discrepancies appeared. The accountants compared internal ledgers with bank records. Several large transfers had been authorized without recorded board approval. Then they discovered executive bonuses that had never been disclosed in shareholder reports. One accountant quietly circled several transactions. "These payments don't match the company's books." Another looked up. "There's a second account receiving funds." Harold immediately intervened. Those were temporary adjustments. The accountant remained professional. "Can you provide supporting documentation?" "They were handled years ago." "We'll still need the documentation." Harold's jaw tightened. "I'll have someone find it." But every answer seemed to produce 2 new questions. Meanwhile, Lisa sat beside Michael in a conference room reviewing another set of documents. Michael looked from one page to another. "I think I understand what Daniel was preparing." Lisa nodded slowly. "He realized something was wrong long before he became sick." Michael looked at her. "Why didn't he confront Harold?" Lisa took a long breath before answering. "Because he still loved him." She traced her finger across Daniel's signature on one of the documents. "He hoped protecting us would be enough." Michael unfolded another certified filing. It outlined the creation of an irrevocable family trust. Everything had been executed months before Daniel's death. Ownership interests, voting rights, succession instructions. Every signature had been properly witnessed. Every filing had been legally recorded. Michael looked up. This trust didn't immediately change who ran the company. No, it stayed invisible. Lisa nodded. unless someone tried to challenge ownership. Michael finally understood. The lawsuit was the trigger, Lisa finished quietly. If Harold had accepted Daniel's wishes, none of this would have happened. Instead, his attempt to seize everything activated the exact legal protections Daniel had built. Michael leaned back in disbelief. So every motion he filed pushed us closer to this. Lisa simply folded the documents. He forced the truth into the open himself. At the final pretrial conference, the judge reviewed the status reports. The forensic review is nearly complete, he announced. We are still awaiting certified ownership documentation from the state registry. Harold remained composed. They'll confirm exactly what I've said from the beginning. He glanced toward Lisa with quiet confidence. My son's shares belong with this family. Lisa didn't respond. She merely sat with her hands folded. The silence unsettled Harold far more than an argument would have. As attorneys organized the remaining exhibits, a court clerk entered carrying a sealed envelope from the state registry. Certified ownership records, Your Honor. The judge handed the envelope to Harold's attorney for review before the hearing resumed. The attorney broke the seal. He scanned the first page, then the second. His eyes stopped moving. The color drained from his face. He looked toward Harold, unable to speak. The entire courtroom waited. The silence stretched across the courtroom. Harold leaned toward his attorney. Well, no answer. What's the problem? His attorney slowly lowered the documents, looking as though he had forgotten everyone else was in the room. Harold. His voice barely carried across the counsel table. These aren't what we expected. The judge adjusted his glasses. Counselor, please place the documents on the record. Without another word, the attorney handed the certified ownership records to the court clerk. The judge read the first page. Then another. He looked toward Lisa. Then back at Harold. Finally, he spoke. It appears the controlling ownership of Carter Custom Furniture was transferred months before Daniel Carter's death. A murmur swept through the gallery. Harold stood abruptly. That's impossible. The judge continued reading. The transfer was made into the Carter Family Protective Trust. Harold shook his head. No. It names Lisa Carter as trustee and her daughter Emily as the primary beneficiary. Harold's face hardened. My son would have never signed that. Lisa's attorney calmly stood. Your Honor, the trust documents include certified signatures, independent witnesses, notarization, and state registration. He handed another folder to the clerk. We also submit the accompanying succession agreement and the board resolutions executed on the same date. The judge reviewed each page carefully. These filings appear complete. Harold looked at his attorney. Challenge them. His attorney didn't move. There are no legal grounds to dispute certified records that have already been registered and verified. For the first time since the lawsuit began, Harold looked genuinely afraid. Lisa finally rose. She faced Harold instead of the judge. Her voice remained calm. Daniel never wanted this courtroom. Harold stared at her without speaking. He hoped you'd respect his decisions. She glanced briefly toward the framed photograph of Daniel that sat beside the family exhibits. When he discovered company money was being diverted into businesses you personally controlled, he had a choice. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward Harold. He could expose his own father while fighting for his life. She paused. Or he could quietly protect his wife, his daughter, and the company he spent years building. Harold slammed both hands on the table. Those transactions were legitimate. Lisa's attorney responded before anyone else could. The forensic accountants disagree. The lead accountant stepped forward after being sworn in. He summarized weeks of investigation, unauthorized transfers, undisclosed executive bonuses, Company funds redirected into businesses owned solely by Harold. Incomplete accounting records. Missing supporting documentation. Each finding matched the certified financial evidence submitted to the court. The courtroom grew quieter with every sentence. Several relatives who had confidently supported Harold lowered their heads. One investor slowly closed his notebook. Another shook his head in disbelief. The judge returned to the bench after a brief recess. This court finds that Harold Carter has no legal ownership interest in the disputed assets. He continued. The controlling shares remain with the Carter Family Protective Trust. Lisa squeezed Michael's hand beneath the table. The plaintiff's claims regarding ownership of the residence and business are dismissed. Harold stared straight ahead. He no longer looked at Lisa. The judge wasn't finished. The court further orders that the forensic findings be referred to the appropriate authorities for review of potential financial misconduct. Harold closed his eyes. Years spent protecting his reputation unraveled in a matter of minutes. Not because Lisa attacked him, because he insisted on opening every record himself. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward Lisa. "Mrs. Carter, did you know this would happen?" She smiled gently. "I knew my husband believed in preparing instead of fighting." "Do you hate your father-in-law?" Lisa looked back at the courthouse doors before answering. "No. I wish he'd chosen family over control." She declined every other question. There was nothing left to prove. Within months, Harold resigned from every remaining leadership position connected to the company. Civil actions were filed to recover diverted funds identified during the forensic investigation. Several longtime employees who had believed Harold's accusations visited Lisa personally. One after another, they apologized. "I should have known. Daniel trusted you for a reason." Investors unanimously approved the trust's long-term governance plan. Independent oversight replaced the old family-controlled structure. Transparency became company policy. The business stabilized. Then it grew. Not because of revenge, because confidence returned. One bright spring morning, Lisa walked through the workshop holding Emily's hand. The familiar scent of fresh-cut oak filled the air. Craftsmen looked up from their benches. "Morning, Miss Carter." "Morning, Emily." Her daughter smiled and waved. Near the entrance stood a newly installed bronze plaque beneath a photograph of Daniel. It didn't mention profits. It didn't mention ownership. It simply read, "Integrity outlives inheritance." Emily looked up at her mother. "Dad would have liked that." Lisa smiled through quiet tears. "He would have loved it." She realized then that victory had never been about keeping a house or winning a lawsuit. It was about protecting the future Daniel had trusted her to carry forward. Harold had tried to take everything through power. In the end, he lost the very legacy he believed he owned. Lisa and Emily walked together into the workshop, where the sound of skilled hands building something lasting echoed through the room. This time, they were finally home.